All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Martha Alter Hines, and I'm here today with Gary Caton. And you might be familiar with Gary already, you might not. And so I met Gary recently through Kaylin Castell. We're both good friends with her and love her so much. And she introduced us. And once we connected, we realized we have so many things in common. And one of the many, many, many topics that I am really excited to explore with Gary over time, we're going to explore today, is the Venus-Mars cycle. Um,
Mm.
so if any of you have been watching my videos for a while, you've seen me do a gazillion videos on the Venus cycle because I've interviewed Kaylin and Sheridan Semple, Melanie Reinhardt, and on and on and on. I have an entire Venus playlist on.
Yay.
Yeah, and Venus is awesome, but I have had such a hard time finding people to talk with me about the Mars cycle. First of all, I've done that one time, I think, with one person a couple years.
Adam Gainsbourg.
Adam Gainsbourg,
Adam
awesome.
Gainsbourg, yes.
Yes, awesome.
Yeah.
And but I have never found anyone to talk with me about Mars and Venus together. So, Gary is someone who knows about this and who said yes, and I'm super, super, super happy and excited. And thank you so much for being here.
Yay, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I mentioned Adam, as somebody who's worked extensively with the Mars cycle, and Adam and I got together in 2015 and held an event where we took an entire day and taught people the Venus cycle. And then we took another entire day and taught people the Mars cycle. And then we took a third day and taught people the Venus-Mars cycle. This was in the Bahamas in
Mm,
2015. We called it the Sky Astrology Conference. There was this
mm,
incredible conjunction of Venus and Mars with the moon. And we were sitting on the beach in the Bahamas, having our favorite beverage and watching this incredible conjunction in the sky. And then earlier this spring, we decided to do that again because it's been 9 years and there's still not a lot of people talking about it actually. And so we thought, hey, let's do it again. And so this time we did it in Savannah, Georgia. Look, because a lot of people traveling out of the country can be difficult or whatever. So we were down in Savannah, Georgia for the conjunction that happened earlier this year, the Venus-Mars conjunction in Aquarius. Um, and we represented that material. And so it's absolutely one of my very favorite things to talk about. I can't begin to tell you how many hours of research. When we did the first one, I remember like I was my very first job was as a draftsman. When I was in high school, I learned how to do drafting and I got a job after school. And so I got out my old drafting tools and I was literally like drawing all these diagrams and really trying to understand it because it was literally, there wasn't much material on it at all. And so I kind of had to sort of recreate the wheel or even create the wheel in some instances. And so it's something I just really am passionate about and very, very happy to share about. Um, I'm going to try really hard not to get too technical or anything so that people aren't like, what's he talking about? But one of the reasons why we did that is because, um, Adam and a lot of people refer to Venus as the sacred feminine, as being the representing the sacred feminine. And then if we think of Mars as representing the sacred masculine, well, there's this idea in Tantra, in alchemy, which are really the same thing. One's just focused on like laboratory thing, and the other's focused on the body as the lab. Um, of merging these two and marrying them. So there's this thing called a hieros gamos, the sacred marriage. And It sounds simple, kind of like getting married sounds simple till you do it. You know what I'm saying? Sounds beautiful and wonderful, but it can be difficult. And so the idea was that if we that we can hold space for each of these archetypes and hold space for them to come together because by by bringing together opposites, Carl Jung said that the tension of the opposites is where all life springs from, this tension of opposites. So being able to hold space for these opposites, number one, and then inviting them to come together and to have this mystical union together. I mean, this is like pretty much the holy grail and of mystical work and stuff. And so, um, as astrologers, we just thought, well, why not approach that from an astrological point of view? And so that's what we've been doing. Um, and it's been really fascinating, it's been really interesting to see, like, for instance, how that plays out in people's lives, It's like I said, you think, oh, it sounds wonderful, it sounds beautiful, and like as soon as I like bring these two things together, it'll just be peace and bliss and harmony, but it's like actually it can like wreck your life. Because if you let's say that you have unconscious blockages regarding one or the other or both, probably both. I mean, we all have unconscious blockages. When you bring things together that have unconscious blockages before they can be really married, those unconscious blockages are going to have to be made conscious. So it's to just say, oh, I want to do a Hiroskamos ceremony and invite these things together. Okay, but you realize that whatever is in the way of that is going to have to be dealt with first, you know? And so literally, and I'm talking about people that I highly respect, that who are very high integrity people, high performing people, and they find out, the hard way that this sacred marriage can really test you at a very in a very big way. Because it's really the deepest part of the psyche. Jung, this idea of opposites is even in Jung's work. He talked about midlife, like the opposite being like the first part of life and the second half of life. These have very opposite um, goals. The first half of life is about doing what the world asks of us, right? Being a good citizen, being a good, good son or daughter, and then a good citizen, and then a good mother or father, etc., right? Um, but the second half of life is then like about what does the soul want of us, being a good spiritual being. It's a very different question, very different. And so this tension of these two opposites, Jung thought that's why midlife was like this really important time, because it was the tension between those two opposing forces that brought out this third thing and so it's kind of the same way with when we talk about the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine, like the tension between and the midlife passage is famously like, it could be a midlife. It was called the midlife crisis for a long time because like figuring out or just allowing, just being in the tension of these really strong opposing forces can really test you, you know? Um, so, so yeah, but even in that process of if we, when we get a little more conscious about either one of them, um, or both of them together, or how one sees the other, or how, like that opens up so much. There's a lot of, so a little bit goes a long way. So like getting the full blown, oh yeah, I'm totally integrated, like who knows if that's ever even really fully on, like we'll probably go to our graves being somewhat still seeking integration. I'm assuming I will anyway.
Um, can I jump in with something?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Uh, so you and I were having a conversation before we started recording that in my mind, as we were talking, I was thinking, oh, this is completely unrelated, totally unrelated segue. I mean,
Oh
tangent,
yeah,
And now
yeah.
I'm realizing,
Maybe
wait a
not.
second, it's so relevant to what we're discussing here. And so
Men
what
and
I
women, patriarchy and so on, that
oh,
part.
well, that too. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
no, okay, another
Yeah, yeah,
part.
yeah.
Yeah.
But um what I was saying was that in my work with I've been channeling this series of,
Ah,
right?
yes.
And the first three I channeled and published years ago, and that's done. But then the three that I've been sitting with for the past several years, and I'm hoping to publish at least one of them in the coming like month or two,
Mm.
are the goddesses speak, the gods speak, and love speaks.
Mm.
And they're entirely about, I'm realizing this, what you're discussing,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
fact that like there's a whole book dedicated just to the goddesses speak, meaning that we are the infinite petals of the divine feminine, all of it. And then there's going to be a whole book called The Gods Speak, which is all about we are also the infinite manifestations of the divine masculine, and they're both
yes,
beautiful, needed, and there's a lot of healing that needs to happen within
yes,
our own being, right? With
yes,
that. And then Love Speaks, of course, is the two of them, the sacred
yes.
marriage, the inner
That's
sacred.
brilliant, Martha. Brilliant.
Well,
Yeah.
it's all channeled. It's not me, but
There's an interesting parallel to that. The Jungian author Robert Johnson, not the guy that sold his soul to the devil and became a famous guitar player, Robert Johnson, but the Jungian author Robert Johnson. He wrote a book called She, He, and We. Similar idea. It was about
oh,
the myths of the feminine, the myths of the masculine, and the myths of union. So,
I need to get those books. Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And just to add in, so something I think I'm also hearing when you're talking is that, there's this idea with our inner feminine, inner masculine beings that we could just come into union, have bliss, and go into utopia or something. And
Right.
and both of us have a background as in counseling, or as in the counseling world, right? Uh,
Yes.
so we both know from that part of our background that trauma healing doesn't work that way.
No.
It's
Yeah.
just not that's not safe. It's not cool. Doesn't
Mm.
work. Um, and so there's this whole process, of course, that we need to be held in a particular way,
Yeah.
a healing
Yeah.
space to allow
Safe
those
container.
energies. Yeah. So
Yeah.
bringing it to the Mars Venus cycle, then
Yes.
I could also say in my own journey with my own inner feminine, inner masculine, I've gone through many years of, doing that healing of both of them and their relationship and all of it. That's a whole topic and a whole
Mm.
story, but it's been literally life-changing, so
Mm.
beautiful. And 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 when I think about the storyline of my own Venus and my own Mars, of course it matches, right? In this crazily synchronistic, or not coincidental way.
Mm.
And so it's amazing to look at my chart and see that reflected in
Yeah.
astrology of things. So
Yeah.
I don't know, do you want to start with um yeah, how do you work with Venus, Mars, and their relationship?
Right.
Like, yeah,
Right.
you want
So
to start with
yeah, I
that?
mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that because it's similar in my chart. I have Venus in Aries,
Yeah, we
and,
both do.
and yeah, and
We
right.
both and we both have Aries Libra nodes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So one of the rulers of our nodes. And then I have Mars in Taurus. So I actually have Venus in a masculine sign and Mars in a feminine sign. So
Mm.
there's There's literally like this there's like this mixture of masculine and feminine in each of those positions. So it's like, and when I was getting my counseling degree, I studied like I did a whole big study on psychological androgyny, and so it's been a thing like even, like even when I was even academically, but in terms of the planets, what stands out um about the two cycles. So Venus has a cycle that looks like we call it an M. There's this morning sky phase and this evening sky phase, and then there's this part where she goes down and in. So the way that Adam says it is Venus dies down and in. So in the
Mm.
middle of the cycle, she goes mythologically, she goes down into the underworld, and your people are familiar with this story. If you've had Kaylin on there and Sheridan, yeah, right. The princess Inanna goes to the underworld and is literally crucified and then is resurrected, right? So there's this down and in, like the feminine dies down and in, but in the Mars cycle, there's this morning star phase and there's an evening star phase. And between them, Mars gets really bright, incredibly bright. So rather than becoming dark and hidden, Mars dies up and out.
Whoa.
So they're literally like the inverse. Mars cycle looks like this, Venus cycle looks like this. They're literally visually the inverse of one another.
Mm.
And they're astronomically, they're literally the inverse of one another. Venus's orbit is like a perfect circle. She is so perfect and harmonious that the Mayans used Venus to make sure their calendar stayed synchronized. Like, okay, let's make sure we're not getting off a little bit. Well, how do we check? Oh, make sure Venus is still in the right place. And whereas Mars is much more, rather than circular, it's much more like a paperclip. It's what we call eccentric orbit. And it's also, Mars's orbit is very inclined. So there's like this erratic, like for instance, Mars is moving now into this place where he's up and out and very bright. But compared to the last two times that Mars did this, 2 and 4 and even 6 years ago, it's not going to be as bright as those times. So
Right.
there's so well, there's a certain part of his cycle where he's really close to the sun, and
Right.
um, and Mars, Venus, and Mercury are the only planets that can. So there's this place between the sun and the Earth. The astronomers call this the astronomical unit. And it's like it's the inner temple, it's the holy of holies for me. Like this is the only place in the universe we know where life exists. This is the inner temple, like in the Jewish temple where only the initiated priests could go. Like this is the holy of holies, you know. And these are the only three planets that are allowed into this inner temple. That's Mercury, Venus, and Mars.
Mm.
And when Mars comes inside that part, he's so bright and so red. And what's crazy about that is if we go back, I think it was 2 cycles before, when I was literally following the astronomy of it. And when Mars reached like this place where he was like much closer, what we just call Earth proximity, he was more than half as close to the Earth as the sun. So Mars was really close to the Earth and super bright red. You on the news, we saw literally Oregon, California, all these places, the skies were completely red. It was literally like the archetype of Mars had invaded the Earth and had turned the skies red. This, and it's so like blatantly, on display. And I was just like, wow, this is incredible. Um, but but yeah, it's variable. Like this time around when Mars gets super bright, it's going to be super bright relative to the rest of the cycle, but it's not going to be as bright as the previous 2 cycles. Whereas Venus is the same every cycle.
Mm.
You see, so there's this really stable, geometrically harmonious, like the golden mean, or what, Greeks call the letter phi, right? All that stuff with Venus. And then there's this this crazy, unpredictable, wild, sort of random, some changeable way with Mars.
Mm.
And what's really crazy about this, so I went and did like a study of their cycle together because there was this guy, his name was Robert Blaschke. He's sadly he's already passed on. But I followed his work intensely for a long time, and he won like this big award in astrology. It's called the Regulus Award or whatever. Really smart guy, really great astrologer. And he posted a blog on this website called the Mountain Astrologer. It's one of the big astrology publications, saying that he said there was an aberration in the Venus Mars cycle. And I was like, wait, really? Like, is that even possible? Like, can there be such a thing? And so I just became like, I get these sort of impulses where like I must figure this out. So I literally studied like 2000 years of these two planets cycles. And that's when I got out my drafting tools. And every morning for like 2 or 3 hours, every single morning, this was all I did. And then I would do the stuff that I have to do to live and survive. But every morning I was like, and what I found is that there's actually a 300-year cycle. So think about this. I mean, Venus goes around the sun in 1 year. Mars goes around in 2 years. Astrologers think of these planets as relatively short-term influences, but together they have this cycle that's about 300 years. And one part of it is very Venusian. Their interactions are like clockwork. Boom, boom, boom. Same, 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 same. It's very like Venus. And then this other part of that cycle is like erratic and crazy. And there's like a really short amount of time between them, and then a really long, and then medium, and all over the place. It's very much like Mars. And um, in the process of doing that, I was also like, um, I was also reading up on the Greek philosophers and stuff, and like really trying to get back to like the foundational teachings of Western civilization. And there's this one philosopher, his name is Empedocles of Acraga. And he had this theory of the universe that's basically based on Venus and Mars. I can read to you like literally what they wrote in poems. So his philosophy was in a poem. And so it goes like this. I'll read it to you. He says, let's see, a twofold tale I shall tell. At one time, it, meaning the universe, grew to be one alone out of many. At another, again, it grew apart to be many out of one. So this idea of one and many, same and other, that's a very fundamental thing in Greek philosophy. Um, and these things never cease their continual exchange. Now through love, all coming together into one. And in this case, he actually uses the word Aphrodite for love. So he's
Wow.
literally saying, by the power of Venus, everything comes together into one. And now again, each carried apart by the hatred of strife. So he's talking about Aries, Mars, right? And so he literally envisioned the universe as like this cosmic pulsing being coming apart and then being pushed back and in and out like this, together and apart. Like this cosmic dance of togetherness and being pushed apart. And I'll give you 7 guesses, and the first 8 don't count. Which part of that cycle do you think we're in at the moment?
Be apart. Wow. That's so hard to figure out.
Right, right.
Never
And
have
and
guessed.
and what's interesting is that there's 200 years of the coming together of this stable part of the cycle, and then there's 100 years of the breaking apart. And that's fundamental to alchemy too, right? Because even think about it, like right now, if we think of the cycle of nature as alchemy, what's happening? And we look around, Well, in the northern hemisphere anyway, the leaves are falling from the trees and everything's getting broken down. And then there's going to be this barren time of year. But then in the spring, life returns and the sun shine, and then we have this, right? And so this fundamental cycle of nature is it requires both. There's a coming together and there's a breaking down, you know? So we happen to be in and the breaking apart part of the cycle began around the 1940s. And so the very middle of the cycle was in the um in the 2000s when all these alphabet agencies were, like Google and Facebook and all of these social media things, which have done what? They've contributed to the polarization a lot greatly. I mean, I think I think Zuckerberg just finally took responsibility for some of that by um in terms of like you know censorship and this and that and yeah, it's been like it's been a crazy time. Like these things that are supposed to social media is supposed to be a way to bring us together, right? But then it's just like there's this just intense polarization, and it's just a product of we happen to be living in an epoch where these forces are part of this larger cosmic cycle, and so it's very difficult if you're a Venus, if you're basically like each one of us, of course, is going to be slightly biased one way or the other towards Venus or Mars, right? Like Venus is like about attraction and love and harmony and balance and all these things, right? Well, if you're maybe, and like I definitely am like have a part of me that's very much like that. I also have a part of me that's pretty wild and doesn't like to be told what to do. And so there's that. And so depending on which one of those is more dominant in you, it might be for Venus people, it's a very hard time to be on this planet because of the polarization and whatnot. But but there's a power to hold the sort of light of if you think about I went through history and I saw these every 200 years, right? Every 300 years there would be like this basically a period of like Renaissance. And then, by the way, the last time there was this Mars period where things got polarized and breaking apart, do you know what historians call that period in history? Like literal academic historians. They call it the general crisis.
Mm.
There was literally crisis everywhere. And it's like, sound familiar? You know what I'm saying?
So wait, just to give us the time frame. So again, say again, it's a how
It's a
many?
300-year cycle. And there's two parts. One of them is 200 years of relative, and so the beauty of it is there's 200 years of the peace and prosperity and basically like a renaissance. There's like a renaissance period, and then there's like a crisis period, and that's for 100 years.
Mm.
Together, it's 300.
That Mars crisis period started in the 1940s, you said?
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, we're a little past halfway. Um, and so yeah, this idea that being able to hold the light of the coming Renaissance or the light of peace and the light of like being able to hold that in the sort of if you think about the yin yang, I'm not saying, by the way, if I say light and dark, I'm not saying good and bad. I'm just saying like, opposites. Being able to hold the light of Venus through the dark time of the chaos of Mars, like I would assume that's why Venus people would incarnate at this time,
Mm.
because they have that ability to hold that. They're right.
Mm.
And whereas if you happen to be really good at the Mars part about breaking things apart and pushing things, that up and out, like really just wow, you know, having that ability, like what I mean, you had Elon Musk like hurling rockets into space and having them land. I mean, he's doing stuff that NASA could never do. It's incredible. Like it's an incredible time to be a Mars person. There's like incredible things, and so they're here to like push the limits and really break stuff apart, and out of that breakdown, new possibilities emerge so that the next Renaissance can be something more than the last one was,
Mm.
you know?
So I'm just
So
thinking about my own chart, my own self as an example. So I have Venus in Aries on my south node. So you could say I'm a very Venusian person, but
yeah.
Mars rules my Venus. So, and what's true for me, lots of things are true for me, but just on a basic level, again, I'm supposed to be channeling these books that are really about the healing of both and the wholeness, the re-meeting, the re-merging of both in this
Hmm.
healing way. So
Hmm.
would you look at that and say I'm more Venusian or more Martian or both?
Well, the South Node, in astrology, particularly modern astrology, what we call evolutionary astrology school, a lot of people will connect that with past lives. But I mean, I lived at a Buddhist monastery for a short while, and if I heard the Bhante, meaning reverend, um, if I heard the Bhante correctly, I mean, he said that Buddha said, and again, this is based upon if I heard him correctly, but that we have lived so many lives that if we simply counted the tears we've cried only for the souls that were our mothers, it would fill all the oceans of the earth.
Wow.
So that's a lot. So it's probably impossible to have a point in the chart that represents the totality of all your past lives. And so I'm guessing, this is just me guessing, but that the South Node, if it does refer to past lives, it would refer to like the recent trend.
Mm-hmm.
So recently, your recent trend was that you are coming from a very Venusian place. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, but being that Mars is the ruler of that, you're also coming from a place of like being a Venus person who is in a time or in a place or in a space that is subject to the energy of Mars. So you can't just be Venus. You have to be Venus within the container of a Mars. And that is pretty much exactly the characteristic of the time that I just described, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, like that's, um, yeah, it's really fitting. So being able to be a Venus person, but within a container that is very Martian, like this is, I mean, I could give a lot of examples. One instance that when I was, that comes to mind, Johnny Cash is a Venus and Aries native. You know, one of the things that traditional astrology will say about planets that are opposite their signs of rulership. Oh, that planet people one way that people interpret what traditional astrology says about that is, oh, that planet's weak. Well, Johnny Cash is a great artist. There's no way in heck that he had a weak Venus.
I'm just
What
saying
was
no.
No, what was weak was the that his environment was not in accord with being an artist. He was born a poor cotton farmer in Arkansas.
Mm.
Not a lot of artists thrive in that environment, you know. And so he got out of there by joining the army, which again, like in his off time, he could play his guitar, but he wasn't. And finally, he got out of the army and he ran into Sam Phillips at Sun Records and he found an environment that was conducive to him being an artist. So the environment that he found himself in, like if we think of the sign of Aries as the environment, he was in a Mars ruled environment, but he was very Venusian. He wasn't weak. You see what I'm saying? If anything was weak, it was the environment's ability to nurture that was not, it's a Mars ruled sign. It's not a Venus ruled sign. It just doesn't do Venus. It does Mars. So it took a while. And like another example, like Johnny wanted to give a concert in prison. And people told him he was crazy. That'll never work. Johnny, come on, do these things we know, like everybody wants to make some money. Just do the things we know. No, he was gonna do it, and he did it. And guess what? It was like one of the best-selling live albums of all time. But
Mm,
he brought Venus, he brought love to those men who, look, I when I worked in counseling, I worked in lockup. But now it was a predispositional facility, meaning these kids had yet to go to trial. So they had allegedly done some pretty bad things. But even these men who had been convicted, and maybe not all of them justly, um, they still were deserving of compassion, and that's what Johnny was trying to bring. He was a Pisces. He wanted to bring compassion because he knew there before the grace of God he knew that one small mistake, one small difference on the road, and he might be there
mm,
you know and so this sacred marriage of bringing, like, that's literally Venus and Aries is kind of like a model of this sacred marriage. It's Venus, but it's in this Mars container, so he really had to be able to contain both of those
mm,
energies. Like, he got the Mars, he got how, yeah, if I like this wild crazy energy, it's in me, and if there but for the grace of God, I might have gone a little too far and wound up in prison myself. And so I want to bring these people compassion and show them a good time and the energy, like, think about it. You've been pinned up inside a prison for how long? And all of a sudden you have a concert. The energy that they were just pounding wow, it made for an incredible piece of art because you had this fusion, this marriage of opposites. He
mm.
literally performed Heros Gamos in a prison.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Neat.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Mm,
So yeah, that's the power when you're able to hold it. That's the power that can be tremendous power can be harnessed and unleashed from this marriage. But yeah, he had to, nobody wanted to do it. He had to fight for it, and even, famously, to finish out, I'll do the final part of the Johnny Cash story. So there's this famous photo of Johnny that they took of him while he was preparing for the concert backstage. They said, "Hey, Johnny, do you got anything to say to the warden?" And this is not safe for work, but, like, trigger warning. Johnny's message to the warden was this. They got, they got a picture of Johnny giving the middle finger to the warden. And much later in his career, Johnny married a woman who was already married when he was already married to another one. Well, Johnny got together with June, his eventual wife, and both of them were married. Now, in the South, back in that day, that was not cool, socially unacceptable. And so Johnny suffered, even though he was a great artist, he suffered, like the country music radio stations would not play his music. He had this, and Rick Rubin, this rap producer, came to him and said, "Hey, John, let's try something different, man. Like, you're not getting anywhere with these Nashville people. Like, let's try something different." So he got him to play these songs by these grunge bands that were popular at the time. But Johnny was a country musician, so he played it the way he knew how to play it. And so you had there's, like, again, this sacred marriage of, like, this rock and roll, like, sort of, Marsy, sort of rough-edged sound with, like, this classic, you know, just acoustic guitar and whatever. And it was wildly successful. And so but again, the country music stations wouldn't play it. So they took out a full page ad in Billboard magazine saying how, I think the name of the company was American Recordings. And they were like, we wanted to thank American Recordings for all, playing our songs. American Recordings would like to thank country radio for playing our songs, which they didn't. And the thank you was the picture of Johnny giving the finger to the warden. So, so once again, the sacred marriage might not be the peace and everything that you think it's going to be, and yet it can be, really cosmically beautiful in its own way.
Well, yeah, and just I'll give one more piece of my own deal because I also have the Venus in Aries and the Sun in Pisces. So it's like
Nice.
fascinating the contrast because I
Yeah.
wouldn't do that personally. Um, but
You
it,
never given anybody the finger in your whole life, Martha?
not literally. No,
No?
no,
Really? Oh my
no
goodness. You're such an
way.
angel. Wow.
But I have in my social work days done things like testify on the stand against serial rapists.
Oh my God. Yeah.
There's that, right? There's
There's
that
kind
part.
of a finger aspect there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
just in the name of justice.
Good for you. Yeah. Good for you.
Um,
Yeah. That's maybe
yeah,
even more powerful, you know? That's an
like
even
that,
more
but
powerful
that I think
example.
also was my Mars is in Aquarius, so I think that was part of that coming out like
Mm-hmm.
pew, like a
Hmm.
knife, boom,
Yeah.
it's done.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
yeah.
notice what's going on there, right? So if your sun is in Pisces, right? Aquarius, when Pisces is on the horizon, so when the sun is rising, Mars would be above. Mars would already be in the morning sky,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? But Venus in Aries would rise behind the sun, so Venus would be in the evening sky. So you have those two planets very much in places that magnify their nature. Like Venus is feminine, and the evening time is more, relaxed and laid back, and it's more feminine, right? Whereas the morning time, it's yeah, we get up, go to work, and everything. So Mars and Venus are in um, even though they're both in fire and air signs, which are masculine, they're in phases that are yang and yin respectively, that sort of magnify their nature. So there's a strong polarity there between those two
Hmm.
archetypes um, that would kind of heighten the tension of opposites, that would
Hmm.
make for, and again, according to Jung, that just makes for more magic if you can hold that tension.
Hmm.
That it
Yeah.
makes it's like a battery, like the more voltage that you have going through, the more current, the more power it produces, but you have to be able to hold that.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I
so
can just give like the little tidbit of my own little journey in this moment again, just to give people a one example, and then I have
mhm.
a question I would love to.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah. So for me, when other people may have heard me tell this story because I've told this story before, but anyway, basically for me, when a few years ago when I first went into my own journey of my own inner feminine masculine, I thought because I have this Venus in Aries, I thought what I would find is an extremely active inner masculine. I found the opposite. I found when I went into me, I've traced my soul back all the way back to the beginning of time, and I saw myself come out of source as a drop, right? And split into my feminine and my masculine. And then my feminine took off. She was like, "Yes, let's go." And she did this joyride literally through time. And she's like birthing galaxies. And like, she's like, so I have my South Node in my Aries in my eighth house. Okay. So like powerful feminine, dark
Mm,
feminine, like dark in the sense of like just powerful
mm,
creator goddess kind of energy.
mm.
And my masculine was like so sweet and nice and just like, okay, have fun.
Yeah, I'll hold space while you do your thing. Yeah,
That, exactly that.
yeah.
So a few years ago when I first saw this, what I recognized was like I was like, my inner feminine, which I identify with much more than my masculine, suddenly I went, "Oh my God, I forgot about him." Oh shoot.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh my
and
God,
that's
I'm so
typical. That's
sorry.
so typical. That's what Jung said. That's what we all. That's a human nature, and we
What?
have that we have to then go back, and the one we forgot, we have to bring out.
Literally,
But
right?
here's the
So
thing, Martha. I mean that's very reflective of the phases in each respective cycle that your Venus and Mars are in. I mean, think about it for a second. So Venus is in the evening star phase, which means she already came up
Mhm.
achieved brightness in the morning, then went through this long descent, went into the underworld, and then came back up. So she's very far along in, if you think of the cycle as a development, she's really well developed. But Mars being just one sign ahead of the sun, Mars has just now, just recently come into view. So he's sort of like this very young, just in the very early part of the cycle. And so their place in the cycles literally reflects exactly the
Yes.
experience you had.
Exactly, right? So
Yeah.
okay, so here's then fast forward a bunch of years where I did all this inner marriage stuff where I was like, "Oh my God," the feminine was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot about you. I'm so sorry, so sorry, so sorry, so sorry." Then the masculine, I did this literal inner wedding kind of thing in myself. And
Hmm.
where they fell back in love and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So then he went through this time where again, it felt like she was so developed, so powerful, so kind of secure in herself, but he was freaked out that she would disappear again. So,
Oh,
so then there was this whole journey of her basically being like annoyed, like you need to go find yourself, go do your thing, right?
hmm.
So he did. So then there was like a year or two where I felt him just kind of go exploring and like
Hmm.
becoming trees and becoming cosmos and a very different journey than her joyride
Yeah, yeah.
giving birth to galaxies or whatever, but he did it.
Hmm.
And
Nice.
then he came back, and here's the really cool part. Where I am now, I have Chiron sitting right on my Venus, like
Hmm.
right on it. And because my masculine now has done his own thing and is now back, suddenly my Venus, my inner feminine, which has been so Aries and so powerful and so independent and so strong and all of that, now what's going on for me is I'm going, oh, okay, I don't need to kind of be masculine as the feminine. I can, what would it be like to just like relax?
Wow.
It's like open into the flower of the Venus that I am, right? Like just like,
That's really what the evening star phase is about relaxing. The day is almost done.
mhm,
Evening is about a time of relaxing and just being reflective. Yeah,
mm,
so wonderful. You're beginning to really by and but here's the thing, you had to separate those two things before you could bring them back together, right?
yeah,
That's alchemy. Break apart and put back together. Solve et coagula. That's the fundamental. You have to break them apart, understand them on their own, and then before you then like, oh, it's only then that she realized I don't have to be both masculine and feminine. I can just relax.
yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah, exactly. And so beautiful. And then the masculine, my inner masculine can then be like kind of step up more, right? Like so then
Wow.
that's where I am in my journey right this minute. And
Wow.
finally I feel ready to finish Goddesses Speak, which is fascinating that I'm in this month
Mm,
with Chiron on my Venus and it's like, yeah,
yeah.
okay, time to finish. Like I'm two-thirds done, but it's
Hmm.
like, okay, time. And now I feel like then I'll be ready to finally find, after years, I have not been ready to channel the God speak because I
Mm,
think my masculine had to go do this thing,
yeah.
and now he's back. And so,
Right.
it's just, hmm, so interesting.
It's
Um,
like I said, I mean, it sounds great. Let's put them together and have a wedding, but it could be a little bit of an adventure.
yeah, exactly. So I think my very last, I mean, we could go on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, this is
Um,
literally, I mean, I've already held two conferences on this, and we could probably come back and do one of these every year, and
totally.
we'll have plenty to talk about, right?
Yeah, seriously. Well, and we have another Venus Mars conjunction happening in early 2026 in Capricorn.
Yeah, yeah. We're coming up on the opposition is where we are in the cycle. So we're coming up on where they will be opposed. I have a date on that. Give me one
Mm,
second. I'll give you the date for that. They will be um they'll be opposite one another on December 12th. Venus in at 5, 6 Aquarius, Mars at 6 Leo. Um and
Oh,
Mars will be retrograde at that time. So Mars is going to be really bright at that time.
it will have just gone retrograde. Just.
Yeah, yeah. So that's sort of the midpoint of the cycle, um, where in the early part of the cycle, um, because Venus is just moving away from Mars, Mars will rise before Venus. And so in the early part of the cycle, the Mars energy is kind of dominant. So there will be this tendency to act first and figure out if it was worth it later. But after the opposition, because Venus is now moving back towards Mars, she she will rise first. And when she rises, when Mars rises, she will be higher than him, actually. And so there's this tendency to want to say, hey, is there's this impulse to do X, Y, or Z, but is this impulse really aligned with my core values?
Wow.
And so there'll be more of a tendency to figure out if it's worth it before going and doing.
Mm.
Um, and in the middle, like at the opposition, there's literally like this, so maybe there's this reevaluation of like, like kind of like with you, like where am I? Where like which one's more developed and which one's catching up? And there's like this opportunity to figure out where we are in this balancing act of the masculine and feminine within us. Um, yeah, so the opposition is really good for that. And the problem with oppositions, though, is because of this polarization, it'd be easy to just get like, you know, Venus can get easily offended, right? She loves beauty, and so if Mars does something, it's like you dirty, so and so, like, right? Or vice versa, Mars wants to go and do, and he's like, would you quit, trying to balance the scales and just come on, like they can, so there could be this tendency to say, no, 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 I'm really just Mars, or no, 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 I'm really just Venus. But of
Mm.
course, both, and so that's the thing you don't want to do is just like push one away and really, because then of course you're just gonna it's gonna be a long distance to, balance. The only way to balance is to be in the middle,
Mm.
and to be able to see where both of them are at and stuff. So
Totally.
I know you had one more question for me, so.
Yeah, I have many questions, but I think just I'm guessing what people would be interested to hear real quick. So on a basic level, and I don't know, maybe we'll have other conversations or something, or if you, whatever, because this could go
Yeah.
on. When you're sitting with a chart, or let's say you're sitting with current energies, you pick either or both. What is the biggest thing you feel into, with Mars Venus, the Mars Venus dance? Like,
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. And we've already talked about both of them. Like for instance, with your chart, how you explained, Venus is actually very far along in her cycle in your chart, and Mars has just begun. So when I'm looking at that, I'm saying to myself, I literally have like a page of notes that I take before I read for some, like I'd spend like an hour. Still, after 30 years of doing this, I spend an hour on every chart before I meet with somebody. I mean, unless somebody just literally says, no, 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 I want to see you today, and I don't care if you have time to prep. Like, if they insist, I'll do it. But I would try to sit with that and think, okay, so their Venus is like really far along in her development, and the Mars might need some support.
mm,
And the Venus might actually need to hear, hey, you can afford to relax a little bit. Like
totally.
you know, like that's literally, I would be literally be saying to myself as a counselor, like the message from Mars is like, hey, it's like, it's cool. You're supported, and like you can go do your thing and explore. Like it's natural for you to not completely know who you are right now. But the only way you're going to find out is to go explore. So go, you know? And meanwhile, the Venus might need to hear, hey, you're so powerful. You're literally like exuding power even when you're just sitting and chilling. So try sitting and chilling, maybe. I don't know.
Totally. That's
And the
exactly.
other thing, the other thing that I look at is what I said, like in terms of their cycle, like the first half of the cycle, Mars is rising first, and so the person might have a tendency to just want to go. This I'll give a really good example. So myself, Julian Lewis, and Adam Gainsbourg, we were the three people that put the first Sky Astrology Conference. And in the process of that, we had a lot of meetings, of course, and there was like at one point there was like this contingent of Nepalese astrologers that wanted to come, and we were going to have to help them through like uh, customs and all this stuff. So I'm born late in the cycle. So my tendency, even though I'm an Aries, like most people think I should be like really impulsive, but I learned, like, for instance, when in sales, they'll tell you, just Gary, just go knock on 100 doors and you'll sell this many. Well, that's true. I knocked on 100 doors and I sold that many, but guess what? I pissed so many people off by just knocking randomly. Like those doors were now closed to me. And I realized like this is not working. So I learned how to do my own telemarketing. So I was only knocking on doors where people were somewhat receptive. And I wasn't pissing people off, and I was selling just as many, but it was a lot more. So I was figuring out which doors are worth knocking on and knocking on those. So it's like Venus rising first, like where's the value in this action? Is it a really full value action? If so, then yeah, let's go. But if not, maybe find where there's more value and then wait a little bit. And so, Julene was the opposite. Julene, and it's funny because she's the woman, I'm the man. Like I'm the one that's supposed to be, stereotypically, well, let's just get him in here. But she was the one, but she's born in the first half of the cycle. She was like, well, I'll do this and I'll do that. And I was like, and she's like, just let's just go and do it. And I was like, like we might want to think about like, is this going to be worth it in the end? I'm like, I'm really happy that you want to do all that, and I love that you have the energy to do it. But like, it might be worth thinking about like, is this really something that's going to be ultimately worth it? So it was really interesting to see that dynamic play out between the two of us, and Adam's somewhere in the middle, and he was kind of like doing the thing of like, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. And so, um, in that case, like, yeah, like even that needs to be balanced, right? So, particularly for people who are in midlife, or right, if I've lived an entire 40 years or so being a person who tends to say, well, I'm going to wait to see if something's really worth it before I go for it. Every once in a while I'm going to need to just go for it and figure out if it's worth it later, because without doing that, like there's going to be this part of me that gets it doesn't it gets stagnant, like this ability to just be really responsive and just go for it and not need to figure it out first. Like that part needs to be exercised. It needs to get out and breathe. It needs to do its thing, you know and so it might be that I talk to the person. I say, well, the chart shows you might have this tendency to just go for it and then figure out if it's late, or the opposite. And yeah, 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 that's definitely. And so, and depending right where they are in their cycle now, I said, well, right now they're in an opposite part of that cycle. So it might be healthy for you to actually just purposefully do the opposite of your natural tendency and to see what that's like, um, to bring balance to those energies. And so those are the two main ways that I'll work with them with the cycle of those two, seeing where they are in their individual cycles. and then seeing how they like which one is sort of leading the cycle between the two of them, and figuring out like how that might need balanced in some way.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think our charts even are really fascinating. I mean, I've never even seen your chart, but from what you've told me about your chart,
Yeah.
it's just so fascinating. Because again, we both have the Venus in Aries. We both have our nodes in Aries and Libra. We have the identical to the degree, the same moons.
Right.
Like what?
That's
Um,
yeah. Wow.
but my Mars is in Aquarius. Your Mars is in Taurus.
Yes.
And so your Mars is following your Venus. My Mars is ahead of my Venus, right? And I
Yeah.
I do tend to be the kind of person who's like, let's go, let's move.
I saw when you first when we first started corresponding, I clicked on your links and stuff. I was like, holy smokes, this woman's doing all kinds of stuff. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And I had a feeling. I was like, well, she's one of them like, let's just go type people. And we even made a joke about it. I was like, when we last time I was like, so, we could schedule something, but I'm guessing like, and I was like, we could, I could get back to you about scheduling, or we could just do it now. And she was like, yeah, yeah, let's just do it now.
Yeah. And then you said to me also, like, yeah, I saw on your website you do all this stuff. And I said, yeah, people ask me all the time, how do you do all that stuff? And I'm like, I don't know. I just,
I
just
just do it.
do it. I don't know. I don't
I
know.
literally, and that's the key. I don't stop because as soon as you hesitate, there's this saying, they who hesitate is like, if you
Hmm.
don't hesitate and you just follow that impulse, it leads a lot of places. It really
Hmm.
does. And
Hmm.
so, but at the same time, if you're doing a lot of stuff, it can become difficult to focus. I hear you saying, for instance, that you're wanting to finish a particular thing, and it's like, if you're doing a lot of things, it might be hard to finish one particular thing. I don't know.
Well, and I have Saturn about to station direct opposite our moons, actually, both of our
Mhm.
moons, and
Yeah.
on my sun. So I am slowing down slowly.
Yeah, sit your butt in the chair and do some writing. I usually tell my clients, like, at minimum, every Wednesday, make sure you make space for that. But,
Mhm.
in my case, what it took for me to finish my book is it was like I would do this thing the first hour of every workday, like it was that, and then
Mm,
whatever else I had to do. And so like holding that space and just really making sure that it became like the number one priority.
mm.
And that's how I got it done.
Beautiful. And just one
Yeah.
thing to add in for people again, like, so if you're comparing you and me, right, you would look at maybe my chart and your chart. 'Cause I have all this Piscean stuff that you don't have, like my sun, my Mercury. You're more, you've got all the Aries, like where I have Pisces, you have Aries. So you
Yeah.
might look at our charts and go, oh, he's going to be the one who's going to be the fiery go-getter one or whatever.
Right.
And, not
But
that
I
you're.
actually have evening star Mars. My Mars is very late in the cycle, so it's pretty laid back. My
Oh,
Mars is really late in the cycle. Your Mars is really early. So we're kind of mirror energies of each other. I'm like the slacker dude I'm like the classic, Gen X slacker. Literally, like put me in a place where I have, food to eat and comfortable chair and a pile of books. I might leave for days. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
so
Well, and I might not leave for days either, but I'd be sitting there on my laptop, like publishing 3,000
yeah, right.
essays. Oh my God.
Yeah, so between the two of us, we kind of have this mirror where I'm late in the Mars cycle and you're early. Like there's a kind of sacred marriage even within the Mars energies, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of balancing that happens there. I was just talking to someone this morning where they were kind of early in the Mars cycle, and I was I was telling them, like, you might benefit from someone who is either older or more experienced, because they're going to be more chill and more they're going to have like this sort of confidence and wisdom that that can help you to kind of relax and allow yourself to be where you are.
Mm,
Those two energies kind of balance one another. And so it's nice when you find someone, say you can do the same thing with the lunar cycle, like you have the waxing moon and you have the waning moon, and two waxing moons are going to be like a lot of energy. But when you have the waxing moon and the waning moon, they can actually kind of complement each other because one has what the other one's lacking, you know? So there's a beauty that comes in, in combining opposites that way, you
mm.
know? Yeah.
Well, this is
Hey, it's
awesome.
been fun.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
for, yeah, for the invite, and hopefully we can stay in touch and do another one sometime.
definitely when we are going to, because
Well,
yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah. We've already.
People, yeah, people who heard the talk I did with Kaylin last week, as Kaylin and I mentioned, Kaylin and I are going to be hosting a free gathering next March 2025, and Gary's going to be one of the speakers. Yay! Yay!
Yay. Yeah.
Yay.
All that Aries Pisces stuff
Yeah.
going on. Yeah, that had been on my radar in a big way. And I had just done a podcast myself recently. And so it was very synchronistic when you showed up on my radar. And so I was like, yeah, okay, let's do it.
Awesome.
Um, but yeah, if people want to find out more about my work, my website is dreamastrologer.com. And I do a lot of work. So I mentioned earlier that there's three planets that can move into this inner temple. They're Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And so that's like, I do a lot, but probably I've done most of my work was with Venus for a long time. And then I've done a lot with Mercury. And so,
You've written a book
I
on
just,
Mercury, right?
I wrote a book on Mercury called Hermetica Triptycha. And tomorrow, when Mercury goes into Sagittarius, or sorry, Saturday, when Mercury goes into Sagittarius, I'm going to be publishing a lot about that material on Substack. So you can find me at dreamastrologer.com. There'll be links to my socials on there, and then you can find the links to my Substack. And you can hear more about the Mercury cycle if you're interested. This year is a year where Mercury is spending as much time in the fire signs as he is in all the other elements. And so there's a pretty profound emphasis on the fire signs with Mercury that is, if for those who want to geek out on astrology, it's pretty fascinating stuff. So
Totally.
yeah, I invite you. And that's a free blog that you can check out. Um, it's a little bit lengthy, so might want to have like more than like I don't know what is it even you're supposed to be like a 10-minute read these days or something. It's definitely not a 10-minute read. You might want to block out maybe a half hour or something.
I will definitely check it out.
Cool. Cool. Thank
Um,
you. Thank you again, Martha.
of course, and I'm
Appreciate it.
assuming you do readings and uh,
Yeah, yeah. I have a membership program where I do like these so I do astrology, alchemy, and magic. And so I do like a monthly report where people can find all the astrologically propitious times for various kinds of things. So like there'll be a Mercury time and a Venus time and a Jupiter time and so on, and like various different times that are really the best time for that sort of activity. So I put out a report each month for that. And then there's if people who like really want to like work with somebody on a regular basis, I have a special program for that. But yeah, people can just book a reading. People can join a membership. And people can listen to my podcast and follow me on socials and all that good stuff. Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. All
Yay.
right.
So so good. Thank you so
Yeah, you're welcome. It's
for
fun.
coming. Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah, and for everybody listening, please give us your thoughts, your reflections, I don't know, anything. Just chime in.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great to hear what people think and like what else that you would like to hear from us.
Yeah,
let us know. Yeah, sounds
absolutely.
good. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Martha.